So that takes us on to section 7, which is applications for detailed presentation. Item 7.1 is 4A Oxgangs Green, Edinburgh. And we will now have a presentation from the Chief Planning Officer.
Thank you. Good morning. So members are being asked to consider an application for full planning permission for residential development at the site of the former Tryst Primary School. The site is currently within the ownership of the City Council. Hopefield Partnerships are pursuing the planning permission to meet the housing requirements as advised by Castle Rock, Edinburgh. So here you have the site location. It's situated to the south of Oxgangs Avenue and between Oxgangs Green and Oxgangs Rise. So Oxgangs Avenue. So it's an aerial view of the site. It measures around 1.5 hectares in area. There's a level change of approximately 10 metres, dropping from the south to the north. This shows a bit more of the site context. On the north-eastern boundary of the site, here lies the Kingdom Hall of the Jehovah's Witness. You've got 4-storey flats here fronting Oxgangs Avenue with some rear drying greens to the northwest of the site. You've got 2-storey semi-detached dwellings running up the western side, the former Oxgang and fronting Oxgangs Rise, sorry, up here. And to the southeast of it, you've got an area of open space beyond which lies the Pentland Primary School. And to the east of the site, you've got 2-storey semi-detached properties rising up Oxgangs Green. We've got this 3-storey corner block on the corner of Oxgangs Avenue and Oxgangs Green, so it defines the entrance up the road. You've got a series of high-density developments along Oxgangs Avenue in the north, some of them rising up to 4 storeys in height. And then as you come up the hill, you've got this mix of 1- and 2-storey dwellings off the Oxgangs Green. There's established tree belts around the boundary of the site. Further tree belts here on the northern boundary. The site's been cleared of the old school, and as I say, we've still got some mature trees and unmanaged scrubland and hedge remaining on the site. Here you can see an aerial view of the site now that the school's been cleared, and you can see the remaining patches of hard standing on the site. Looking across the site, and there's also still some of the steps remaining on the site, and there's a level hard standing plateau. You've got these listed buildings, 2 listed buildings on the site. You've got a water pipe which runs along the eastern side of the site, which feeds into Comiston Springs Waterhouse. This slide shows one of the 2 listed structures on the site. These are 17th century Category B listed structures. They're rectangular dressed stone buildings listed in respect of their relationship to the first piped water system in Edinburgh. At the moment, you can see they're overgrown and bound by this metal fence. So local development plan policy, this designates the area as urban area, but you will see there's a small chink of open space as defined in the local plan creeps into the bottom of our site here. So access to the site is an existing access coming here off Oxgangs Green, which they've utilised into their development. You can see coming in here, focusing the development around an area of central open space. So in total, the applications for full planning permission, 85 affordable residential units. These are comprised of 79 flats and 6 houses. The principle of affordable housing is acceptable on this site. The application provides for a mix of housing uses. Almost a quarter of the new homes would be provided for elderly residents principally down this southwest corner block. This is an identified need for this location. 7 of the units would be family units. These are the 3 pairs of semi-detached housing and 1 larger ground floor flat. So whilst this provision meets the support of Edinburgh Council Housing, members should note this falls short of the 20% provision recommended in the Edinburgh Design Guidance. The size and orientation of the accommodation is acceptable, and they all have access to open space as per the guidelines. Parking is also met within the proposed layout. You've got 56 spaces proposed for 85 new homes, which is 66%. There's 159 cycle spaces proposed and 10 electrical vehicle charging spaces. So there's an existing footpath across the site, and this will be utilised and will provide a through route, providing a link for pedestrians and cycles through to Pentland School. So with regards to the housing style, the traditional style of buildings with pitched roof, full ceiling to floor windows, proposed on many elevations, also with Juliet balconies. You can see the balconies running along the side here. We finished with white render, buff brick panels, mid-grey windows and doors, and anthracite UPVC rainwater goods and anthracite concrete tiles. So the two listed buildings down here in the south of the site, in here and in here, proposed they would be unfenced and upgrading, and would be accommodated into the layout and provide public amenity with amenity boards and seating. Here, this is PWIT 2, is proposing a stepped area of public amenity with public interpretation boards signifying the history of the water facility. So the trees on the site are not subject to statutory protection. These trees up the eastern boundary will be largely retained. These trees in the northwest will be removed to accommodate the development. So with regards to public consultation, the application was advertised on the 6th of April. 3 letters of objection were received objecting to the proposal. The main reasons were increase in traffic and lack of existing parking in the area. The visual impact of the development rising to 3 and 4 stories on the highest parts of the site. Loss of light to neighbouring dwellings, in particular on the western boundary. Loss of woodland and its resident wildlife. Noise and disturbance to the building works to local residents and the local school. Lack of security arising from the new route through the site. Impact on local amenity. The Firhill Community Council raised concern with respect to the village green space, which may encourage ad hoc parking around it. They think the homes proposed are too many and too small, and that the site's topography doesn't warrant easy access for elderly or disabled residents. The Fairmire Community Council support the restoration of the 2 listed wellheads. So in response to these comments, members should note that the applicant has undertaken a parking survey of the area, and that adequate on-site parking will be provided. As I said, 65 spaces for 85 units, all within the site. This is at the upper end of the requirement for the location. Transport have raised no objection to the proposal, as adequate cycle parking is provided within the layout and good pedestrian connections are proposed. The density and height of the development exceeds the surrounding area. However, it's been designed such it will not overshadow or overlook neighbouring dwellings. And the higher part of the developments are located towards the centre of the site. And the development, of course, will provide much needed social housing in this locality. So this is a section on the western boundary where some of the objections have come from. The development does sit very close to the western boundary, and the applicant has demonstrated the distances of window to window to those neighbouring dwellings. The new back gardens are quite short, 7, 8, 9 metres in depth. However, the applicants advise, because this is a social registered landlord, future extensions of the property will not be required, and as you can see, adequate window-to-window distances are met. The loss of woodland on the site is regrettable. However, the trees are not protected, and the ecology survey did not find any European protected species. And the applicant proposes hedgerows and landscaping within the site that will encourage further biodiversity of the area. With regards to daylighting, only one of the new proposed dwellings will have a marginal daylight fail for a limited period of the day. So the entrance block to the site here is quite high, 3 stories, but it does pick up on this entrance block at the bottom, Oxgangs Green, Oxgangs Avenue. Quite prominent in the street, but it will not overshadow or overlook any of the neighbouring properties. So the application also proposes to replace and reroute the existing culvert. You've got the existing culvert at the moment cutting right across the site, and the route of this is met with the agreement of Scottish Water. Here you can see the site is prone to flooding down this western side. SEPA have raised no objections to the new development subject to conditions imposed. Historic Scotland have raised no objections to the rerouting of the pipeline and the upgrade of the wellhead structures. So if committee are minded to grant, the appropriate legal agreements are necessary and contributions to be applied. So community and families are advised that committee are minded to grant planning permission, then a contribution of £107,816 index linked for education infrastructure is required, and also a financial contribution of £526.26 per dwelling is required to alleviate healthcare pressures in the Allermuir contribution zone. Transport have also requested financial contribution to infrastructure. So in conclusion, the principal housing on the site is acceptable. It would deliver much needed affordable housing. The development will enhance this underutilised urban site and will enhance permeability and connectivity through the site with improved access for the public to open space. And it's considered that the loss of part of the site's open space to the south, whilst opening up the remainder of the public use, justifies a minor departure from the development plan in this instance. And it's recommended that the application be granted. Thank you.
Thank you for that comprehensive presentation. So, do any of the committee members have questions for the Chief Planning Officer? So I'll take Councillor Booth, Councillor Staniforth, Councillor Osler and Councillor Child.
Thanks very much, Convener. Thanks very much indeed for the report and for the presentation. I've got a couple of questions. One on Environment 12 trees. Presumably the contention is that none of these trees are, what's the phrase that Environment 12 uses? A tree or woodland worthy of retention. So presumably the argument is that these aren't worthy of retention. That's my first question. Second question is about parking. I think, although it's within policy, it's on the high end of our policy. And has there been any discussion with the developer about reducing that, putting in car club spaces or whatever? And thirdly, perhaps more importantly, the design panel was scathing in their response to this. What dialogue has happened and what attempts by the developer have been made to take on board the comments of the design panel?
Okay, so taking the first point, the trees on the site, the applicant undertook a tree survey, and I think, I can't find from my notes, but I think that you'll see in the report, I think there's 4 trees there that are fairly good quality that will be lost. Which, as I said, is regrettable, but there is proposals to replace those. They're not protected. They could be chopped down today. So unfortunately, they will be lost to accommodate this development. The second question is about parking. I lost the thread of that, sorry.
So although it's within policy, it's on the very high end of policy.
Yes.
So what dialogue has happened with the developer to encourage them to reduce that, for example, by putting in car club spaces? And what is the access from this? I don't know this site particularly well, I have to admit. What is the access to local bus routes?
Sorry, there are bus routes down on Oxgangs Avenue to the north, and they're certainly within 400 metres from the site. And we've got these new footways and cycleways through the site. You mentioned the urban design panel. So the original planning application was the original planning application was withdrawn, and the applicant revisited the urban design panel and was open to suggestions from them. Clearly, there's a level of development and they need to provide on the site. So they have taken on board a number of issues, including getting decent open space, usable open space, and getting better orientation of particularly the elderly persons block. The car parking is at the upper end. I think there has been some reduction. Yeah. We've also got a provision for city car club vehicles into the site. But there's a balance here because we have also objections from the local community about concern that if there's not enough parking on the site, people will park elsewhere. They're within the requirement, but yes, they're at the upper end of the zone. I'm not sure if Transport want to make any further comment.
Yeah, my colleague's absolutely right. I think the 65 spaces for 85 units, it's about 75%. So it looks to be about right, and certainly the assessment was that that's about right. And it is a balance, as my colleague says, between potential overspill parking, given the objections. But to us, it sounds about right. There is a car club space proposed, and cycle parking is at about 200%. So it does look about right to us.
Okay, thanks for those comprehensive answers. So let's go now to Councillor Staniforth.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about trees as well. The report says that in the northwest there'll be a loss of 6 trees, 2 of which are category A, an Italian alder and a Norway maple. I was just wondering if the replacement trees will be like for like in type of tree.
And that's perhaps something we could tighten up with through our landscape condition. They have requested planting within the site and reinforcement. I think they're proposing orchard trees in that location, which is slightly different, but we could tighten that up in the condition. Obviously, it's going to take time to get to that maturity within the site. So that's something we can...
Yes, orchard trees might be quite an interesting thing to help build the community. People are looking to... Okay, Councillor Staniforth.
I mean, it's perfectly possible that replacement trees of a different type would actually be better for the wildlife. And my follow-up was going to be, what is the rationale if they're not going to be the same? So if we have good rationale for replacing them with a different type of tree, that's fine. But I'd just like to be sure that we do if we are replacing them with different types.
Yeah, yes, that seems perfectly reasonable. So obviously, we'll hear what the officers have to say on that. I mean, the orchard trees sound interesting, and indigenous trees probably are good for local wildlife and so on. So we'll leave that with the officers for a minute, and we'll go to Councillor Osler.
Thank you very much indeed for your presentation. It's to explore this idea of the accessibility and the actual sort of connectivity of this site, the throughway through it. You showed us a very brief photograph of a sort of path. My concern would be if this is supposed to be the access through, what kind of path is this going to be? How is it actually going to be set up? And if it's supposed to be for pedestrians and cyclists, will there be any grading on it? You know, will it be of a suitable standard to make sure that there is an awareness of what this path is actually for, etc.? I just would like to sort of have a bit of better understanding, because there's been very little information about that part of it.
So I don't have the detailed hard landscaping plans. They're available on the portal. There is an existing path there that used to serve the school. So that is going to be upgraded and enhanced and cleared. And you can see as you come in, it's an open element to it as you come into the site here. We'll link up through the site. This is a level point. You come out to a level point on the road, and then you can push your buggy, your bike, walk up to the Pentland School. So it takes a level aspect across the site.
I suppose what I want to check is that there is the priority for the pedestrian and cyclist, because it is crossing sort of areas of where cars are and bits and pieces, and that was more of my concern, is that it doesn't look that dedicated to me.
Yeah, you're right. It's coming across a mixed surface here through this. Yeah, there's no priority for pedestrians through that part.
Yes, please.
If we can find a way to make sure that that actually is noted in the fact and something is done about it, because obviously with developments like this, if we want to encourage more people to walk and cycle and we're going to reduce the number of car parking spaces, we actually have to support that part of it rather than just tokenise it from... Sorry, not wanting to lecture. The second point I just wanted to raise very, very briefly was about lighting. If we're going to have large amounts of open space, what is the actual going to be the lighting area in those spaces to make sure that, you know, that people can access across the parkway spaces, you know, reasonably and so on, and they can actually see properly?
I do apologise. I don't have the hard landscaping plans with me today. We'll just check.
I'll try and get them on the portal.
Yes, some good questions. Could you just show us where so that's the school at the bottom, the new Pentland Primary, and do you know where the local shops are? That would be the kind of journey that people would probably make by foot as well.
Further just off here, you've got a local community centre and a library. I don't have the plans showing the shops. They're a bit further afield.
Up at the top, so can we go back to the site? Sorry. Can we go back to the site plan to see the relationship between the shops and the school and so on, just to make sure how understand how these paths fit into the local network?
This one?
That might do, yes.
There's a lot of information in there.
It's really just to see the relationship between the proposed paths and the amenities that Councillor Osler alluded to that people might be walking to.
I don't have a wider scoping plan on this presentation, unfortunately. There was a lot of information submitted in the design statement and the planning supporting statement, which showed those zones of distance. Unfortunately, I don't have them.
Okay, we'll maybe now go to Councillor Child. Thank you for waiting.
Okay, my question's about the Edinburgh Design Guidance and the fact that out of the 85 units, only 7 would accommodate families, and that's well short of the 20% provision in the Edinburgh Design Guidance. There's no sort of comment of what balances that, but the next paragraph from the next page goes on to talk about the needs assessment within the area being for units designed specifically for older persons. Is that the balance that would make this acceptable?
That's the balance. Clearly, we have to go with the advice from our housing department as to what the needs are for the area. And they've worked with Castle Rock, Edinburgh. They've identified the particular need in this area is for elderly persons accommodation. That's always been on the table with this application for about a year and a half now. That's been the demand. So it's unfortunate there isn't more family homes. We've got 6 homes and 1 flat. And as I've said, I think it's less than 7-8% of the total, but this is the identified need by the social housing landlords.
So is the thinking that this building of 21 units, specifically elderly people, might free up some accommodation elsewhere that would be for families? Possibly. Has that been in the mix in discussions?
That's a wide study. It's not something but that could happen.
Yes, I think you might be right there, Councillor Child. It's an established estate, and there's probably a lot of people that have lived there for a number of years. But we, unfortunately, don't have that in the report, so it's a good question. So, with that, was there something we were looking for an answer for one of the...
It doesn't appear that there is any lighting on the cycle path. We could put on an informative that we look at the design of that. I would obviously have to confer with our transport colleagues as well. Matthew, do you want to?
Yeah, it'll be subject to road construction consent, so we would expect it to be lit, surfaced, adequate drainage, etc. within that. So that's under separate legislation, so we'll deal with it at that stage. There's also, I believe, a quality audit to be done as well, which will look at some of those issues to do with connectivity, and it's the details of that, because a lot of that we need to know what the levels are, and it's the 3-dimensional design that's really important as part of that.
If Councillor Gordon will wait, so I know he wants to come in, but I would just get Councillor Osler to clarify this particular point, and then we'll go.
My point about the lighting was the general lighting of the site there as well. If we're going to encourage people to walk, it's not just on one particular part of the dedicated sort of cycle route, it's all the connectivity parts of the site itself. Plus, if there's a big green part in the middle, if that's dark, that can cause antisocial behaviour and all sorts. And I want to make sure that, we're not creating problems for ourselves in that. So the lighting thing is a general to make sure that the lighting within the area is sympathetic, so that it obviously isn't too light, but it also allows people to feel safe when they're actually traversing the site. Could I come in and just say the committee could ask for a further condition asking for details of the landscaping, including lighting, as an addition to what we have here. Condition 2 talks about a management plan, but it doesn't talk about the detail.
The management plan will be very interesting as well, I think, given what you're talking about. So, Councillor Gordon, over to you.
Page 32 of the report, archaeology interpretation. What discussions has taken place regarding the protection of the two wellheads and the culvert, and have you considered putting in a condition as requested by the Historic Scotland?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. There's also two parallel applications for listed building consent running parallel. These will be dealt with under delegated procedures. One of those is for all the restoration of the wellheads. There's a heritage report being done for that, and that has support of Historic Scotland. And the other one is for the rerouting of the culvert, given the proximity of it to the wellheads. So those are running in parallel. The conditions of archaeology should be on here. Yeah, so condition 5 picks up on the requirements of archaeology. And was there something specific from Historic Scotland that you felt should be? The interpretation, they've come forward with a plan going back to the historical naming of the buildings, linking it back to the history. Yeah. Yeah. So that they're also informatives and conditions to ensure that protection. And as I say, with the listed building application, that will secure the repair. Okay.
So it actually does state no works will take place in the site until the application is secured and implemented a programme of archaeological work. Has that been put in as a condition yet?
That's condition number 5.
Okay, thank you.
So, yes, Councillor Booth now.
Thanks, Camilla. I mean, I don't know this site particularly well, and I'm just sort of wondering whether a site visit might be helpful. I mean, certainly I think it would be helpful for me to get a better understanding of what the application is. I did have one follow-up question and one new question. So, if I understand you correctly, the comments that are included in the appendix from the Edinburgh Design Panel were on the original application, and there were revisions that took that into account. Have I understood that correctly? And if that is correct, then what were the revisions?
Sorry, the comments on this application from the Urban Design Panel relate to the consideration of this application. This was presented to Urban Design Panel in December last year. The previous application, I don't recall, went to the Urban Design Panel. There was time delays in that happening. So following a withdrawal at our recommendation, they came back to the Urban Design Panel and sought to work with the advice from the panel through this current application.
Councillor Booth.
Thanks, Camilla. Thanks very much. That's helpful. But unfortunately, that doesn't reassure me, because obviously the comments in the appendix are pretty scathing. And if I had understood that they were on a previous design, not the current design in front of us, I think that might have satisfied me. But I have real concerns. I mean, I'm sure colleagues will have read the section where it says, if I can find it, that the panel strongly agreed that the proposal did not represent the best solution for the site, and that an opportunity has been missed to create an inclusive development with a sense of place which responds to the positive characteristics of the site and the surrounding area. I don't think we can dismiss the design panel so easily, and that's part of the reason why I'd be quite keen to go on a site visit to explore this in more detail.
Can I come back on that? If I can just be clear, what the panel were commenting on was not this particular scheme, but the pre-application proposal. And following on from the design panel's comments, that they took a number of those on board. They refocused their development around the centre area of open space. I don't have the previous scheme to show you that was presented to the design panel, but they have taken on a number of the comments that were raised.
Thanks. Okay, that does reassure me a wee bit. I don't know whether it's possible, whether it would be feasible to get a site visit with perhaps somebody from the design panel so that we can discuss their concerns and how their concerns were addressed. I don't know whether that's feasible or not. But my separate question was about open space. I think your report says that while there is a small infringement on policy in terms of open space, that's compensated for by the fact that there will be public open space as part of the development. Can you go into that in a wee bit more detail and show us where that is?
Yeah, so to be clear, with regards to local plan policy, the area of open space defined in the local plan creeps into our development site, and the boundary is something like this. So clearly that will be lost to the development. I think it was there historically as some expansion of the school. And my point is, at the moment, while people are accessing the site, it's not really open. It was a private school site. So in opening up the site and creating this development, they're opening up with a central open area, and that would therefore compensate for that loss. I can show you that on the local plan extract. There, so you can see the yellow is the application site, and the green is the area of open space. All of this is the open space as protected by the local development plan. So there is an infringement there.
Councillor Booth.
Thanks, Convener. So your argument is that infringement is acceptable because of the central sort of square area, which will become public space, is that?
Yeah, there will be an opening up as amenity area created around the listed buildings, and there'll be the open areas defined in the. So here we have it's still green, albeit part of it's private. These areas are now public and amenity access, and this is access for all the residents and potentially for people coming to and from the school can utilise this area. So this strip here and this strip here, this will be private to those occupants. This will be private to the elderly persons. So it's a balance.
I don't see any further questions, so I'm happy to open it to Councillor Osler. Do you want to make a point?
Yeah, I actually would like to support Councillor Booth on this. I'm a little concerned. I appreciate what the developer is trying to do with this site, and I think it's highly commendable. And also, but I am deeply concerned about the amenity for the individuals who are going to exist on this site. The connectivity. There seems to be quite a lot of sort of small bits and pieces that I'm not sure that are 100% acceptable. And I would obviously support Councillor Booth in the idea of it would be good to actually view the site properly to actually understand how these areas all connect up, because what they're trying to do is a very, very good thing, and it would be really nice to actually feel that we could actually just make sure that it is exactly what it should be and it does connect up properly, because I must admit I do have a few concerns about how the site actually fits into the surrounding area, and not knowing enough about it, I don't feel very comfortable about obviously putting more conditions on it or delaying it or something. I'd rather just actually have a look at it.
Before making any decision on that, I would like to ask the Chief Planning Officer about whether there's any likelihood about non-determination of this application, in which case I would not seek to have a site visit, and I'm open-minded about that at this stage as well, I must say. So can we hear from the Chief Planning Officer?
Yeah, yes, of course the applicant has the right to appeal against non-determination. The application has been running for a long time, and we've worked through various different issues to try and get to an acceptable level of scheme. You might see on the history, this is about round 4 of the revision. So if they have the right to appeal to the government. We've had project plans in place. I need to check the dates on the project plans.
Councillor Child.
I'm honestly not sure what we would gain in terms of this development by going to visit it. To be frank, I'm prepared to move when the time comes, that we grant it without a site visit. I really don't think it's necessary. in this particular case.
Mr. McClellan.
Thank you very much, Convener. Obviously, if other councillors are not fully aware of what the site is like and the areas like, then that's there's nothing I can do about that. But I do know the area reasonably well, and from what I can see and from what I've read, it's a reasonable use of the site. So I wouldn't deny other councillors the opportunity to request a site visit. It's not to denigrate that at all, but if it gives them any kind of reassurance, in my understanding and knowledge of the site, this looks to me like an appropriate development, and certainly I would agree that it meets a considerable demand and an urgent one at that. So I would support Councillor Child in not seeing the need personally for a site visit.
Thank you for that. So Councillor Stannenforth wished to come in as well.
I just wondered, did the officers manage to get that hard landscape plan? Because if you have, that might address some of the site visit concerns without actually needing to go on the site visit.
Sorry, can I just confirm, we did find the hard landscaping plan and we talked about the lighting? Was that what you were looking for? Yeah, Matthew came in and gave us a talk about the lighting.
Could you put that back up, please?
Oh, sorry, it's only on my...
Right. Yeah, can we see it? Is that possible?
I really don't think that's going to help, is it?
Do you see the southern side? Can you zoom in?
But I don't, again, I mean, what...
So zoom in. Go to, it's the southern side that's got a bit past you.
Hold on, just have to close some stuff on that.
There. So that was the... Can you come slightly this way?
That was the plan.
That's it, yeah. Okay. And you can't see what materials are here. That's why I didn't put it up, because it doesn't really help.
It's not great.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions or clarifications about what they're seeing on the screen? I mean, visiting the site, it's obviously an open site, so you're not going to get all of this, you're not going to get any of this detail anyway. This is to do with what's being proposed by the applicant. So the materials selection, planting, things like that will be within what you see here. You'll just see a field if you go out to the site. And also if you go out to the site, things like the connection to the path into the local street network may not be ideal, but that's off the site in a way. So there's a limit to what they can actually do, because there's property boundaries obviously there and there. So there's a limit to what we can actually achieve by going out to the site. So I'm like Councillor McLennan, I'm reasonably familiar with the area, and I am aware that there is housing of this type in the vicinity, and there is, as Councillor Child has brought to our attention, there is a need through the report for housing for the elderly, and I think this green space in the middle is of interest, and if the management plan is well written, that can be a great space for the people living in the houses. So there's a lot of things about this development that I see it as good. I am taking note of what Councillor Booth has mentioned, because in some ways there's a problem with an urban design report of an interim scheme, which he referred to as scathing, whether that's the appropriate word or not. It was to do with something that's not on the table now, so it's difficult to take full cognizance of that because we don't know what it was they were actually referring to. Maybe that's something that we need to think about in future reports, how the urban design's interim guidance is fed in to see if issues have been closed off or not. But over the piece, I'm increasingly thinking, well, first of all, I'm going to give everybody the opportunity to ask any questions on what we've seen on the projector, albeit there's not a lot there. But after that, well, first I'll open it for questions. So what's there?
It won't surprise you to know I want to go back to the path, if you wouldn't mind. I'll tell you what my concern is with that. As you can see, the connection to what it's been connected to, we've got a wide bit and then a very narrow. I appreciate that's not on the applicant's land, etc., that bit. That does deeply concern me, because the issue that we're basically saying is that's supposed to be a footway and a cycle pathway, but what it's leading to is definitely not, and is not suitable. And I'm concerned the fact that what we're basically saying to individuals is we're trying to encourage them to walk, we're trying to encourage them to cycle, we're reducing their parking capacity, but we're not actually supporting the active travel site. I appreciate that is not on the applicant's land, but that would then lead into question of why we're making that into a pathway. Because it's not actually we're not allowing full flow through onto something else. And so it does make me feel very uncomfortable in the fact that we're encouraging individuals to use it and then go into a tiny, tiny, tiny bottleneck.
I think it's an interesting point, but I understand that to be an established path anyway through the site. So it's a given, and it was presumably part of the local authority scheme when this part of Oxgangs was built. So, and those are now people's gardens, and that's the nature of planning, that you can only seek to enable, but you can't actually impose things on land that you don't own. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same, really, that obviously we are constrained on that part of the site by existing gardens. We can't widen it because of people's gardens that it's going into. The whole point of having that access, though, was to open up permeability of the site, and it does mean that obviously there is greater permeability, and if we only had the access, the transport access into it, it would be effectively like a cul-de-sac. So at least here we are giving the opportunity for pedestrians to actually access through, cyclists too. I appreciate that it is narrow, it's not an ideal cycle path, but it is obviously, we are constrained by the existing gardens.
Sorry, it was just if you come back, but again, I would like to make note of the fact that we're encouraging individuals to use it. We're saying, I mean, we're having as part of the application that it is a dual access. And what the point I'm trying to get across is how wide are we putting something into? What we get consistently is an issue of lack of connectivity. And what we're basically saying is that we can connect it so far, but as you say, because of gardens and bits and pieces. So my argument for this is, can we be very careful then what we're actually saying that space is? Because I would question the fact of actually being a proper cycle and pedestrian pathway, because it isn't. is the point I'm trying to make across.
I don't think that there's any issue about it being a pedestrian pathway, but you're correct that it may not be suitable for pedestrians and cyclists. But it is what it is, because it's, as the officer said, that we can't make any larger without the developer, coming to some deal with the landowners there. Mr. Booth.
Thanks, Convener. Specifically on this, perhaps Transport could let us know what the width of that path is and how that compares to street design guidance minimums and recommended widths.
It looks to be maybe 2 metres wide at that point. It is quite overgrown. I think there's quite a bit that needs to be, could be cut back on that. As has been said, it is what it is. Ideally, we would be looking for something that's wider than that. 4 metres would be the desirable minimum. I think the reality is, if we, on the one hand, there is an access there, so we want to use that. If we're going to try and restrict it to cyclists only, I think the reality is that cyclists will use it. And so there's a question. I'm always reluctant to put up signs saying don't do something when you know it's actually going to happen. I think we just have to take it that it is what it is, and just have to work around that.
I'm wondering if there could be an informative, in terms of there is going to be a landscape plan brought back, and so that would be something that the developer can look at and discuss with Transport colleagues.
Yeah, as I said earlier, there's still the road construction consent process to go through. So it would be a road under its legal meaning. So we would expect that to come forward and be adopted by the council and meet all the standards in terms of lighting and surfacing, that kind of thing. At which point the council would become responsible for making sure that the maintenance of that is kept up to date, including cutting back any vegetation.
So the RCC includes this pathway we're talking about as well?
Yes, when we talk about roads, roads has a particular legal meaning, but it includes cycle tracks, potentially verges, carriageways, footways, potentially footpaths as well. So we would expect that to be part of the road construction consent. My understanding is that is what comes forward as part of the planning application. There is an indicative adoptable area that's been set out, and it includes that route.
Oh, okay, so thank you for that. So Councillor Booth.
Thanks, Commissioner. I would just note that path is within the red line, so presumably it is perfectly possible for us to, through the road construction consent, require all of these things. But my question is twofold. Presumably there's private land on either side, so there's no potential to widen that path. Was there any conversation with the developer about putting in a pedestrian cycle link to the green space to the south, or is that not practical?
It's not something we explored. You mean around the southern boundary of the site? No, it was always taken through the site. There's quite a level change to the site. There's quite a steep slope on that southern side, and also you have quite a high point of rise and steps coming up to Oxgangs Green itself. So hence the reason why the route is taken right through the centre of the site to a level point onto Oxgangs Green. I can show that again with the hard standing. There you can see how the road's rising up. You would have to dismount or carry your buggy up the steps. So that's why it was taken to a level point, coming out around here. You can see the point of access coming through here into the level.
Councillor Booth, a further question?
Thanks, Commissioner. I would still prefer to go on a site visit. However, if that is a minority view, I will, of course, accept the view of the committee. Can I just double-check, though, on the issue of the car club space? I think it's referenced in informative number 2. Is that right? And it specifies a sum towards the provision of car club vehicles in the area. That seems to be somewhat vague. Could we not tighten that up and require a condition that there is a car club space in the specific site, which would help to improve the accessibility?
Normally what happens with these is that there's a meeting every few months, or just however often is required, to identify suitable sites. And so as part of this, that it would be put forward to our colleagues to discuss that with Car Club about exactly where that would be. Yes, preferably within the site, But our preference is to leave that really up to the details of how that's going to fit in with the requirements of Car Club. But that's it's up to yourselves whether you want to restrict that.
So, yeah, I can understand that the car club would need to be involved in that conversation to ensure it's a viable proposition wherever was selected. So I think that we've had a lot of questions and it's strayed into debate, and there's a question about a site visit. Okay, we're getting to a position where, as convener, I'm going to move this shortly, but I just want to be clear about the conditions, informatives, not all that in the first instance. So what I'm going to ask to do is, we've got a list from the clerk and we've got a list from the Chief Planning Officer. So I'm going to ask Veronica first to go through your...
Sorry about that. A condition to provide further details of landscaping, specifically on lighting and pedestrian and cycle paths on the site. And there was something that Councillor Staniforth raised about trees in terms of replacing them like for like. Is that possible? Should that be added? I'm just not sure. I don't have clarification.
No. Can I just come in there and correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Staniforth? You're not necessarily wanting like for like. You're just wanting the details because you were probably happy with indigenous trees. So really, to the satisfaction of the Chief Planning Officer, would that be okay? Any other potential?
No, it was just the details of all hard and soft landscaping shall be submitted to and approved by the Planning Authority within 6 months of start of development.
Committee, Councillor Gordon.
Does that include the condition I asked about regarding the whaleheads?
That's already conditioned in there in condition 5.
Are you satisfied that's covered by condition 5, Councillor Gordon? Okay. So, like, bringing this, our committee agreed to. I'm about to move this. I am moving this. So, our committee agreed to move that, or is there any dissent? Councillor Booth.
Convener, I completely agree with the principle of affordable housing on this site. I think that's excellent. But I do think there are specific issues that need further examination, not least the pedestrian cycle access, as Councillor Osler has highlighted, the issue of lighting. I think the issue of open space has been resolved, but I still have a sort of slight niggle in the back of my mind. And I also have serious concerns that the serious concerns that were raised by the design panel have apparently been addressed, but I would like confirmation of that. And if possible, I'd like a site visit with a member of the design panel there to explore what their concerns were and to find out to what extent those concerns have been addressed in the revisions. So I would move that we continue the application for a site visit.
Do we have a seconder? Okay, the motion by Councillor Gardner, seconded by Councillor Child, is to grant planning permission subject to the conditions, reasons and informatives detailed in the report, and to provide further details of landscaping, specifically on lighting and pedestrian cycle paths and access on the site. The amendment by Councillor Booth, seconded by Councillor Staniforth, is to continue the application for a site visit. Could I have all those for the amendment to continue the application for a site visit, please? That's 2. And could I have all those for the motion to grant planning permission subject to the conditions, reasons and informatives? That's 8. The motion is carried and planning permission is granted. That takes us on then to item 4.1, which is 20, the WISP at lands 90 metres west of, which is a forthcoming application by Springfield Properties plc, and we'll have a detailed presentation, from the Chief Planning Officer.